they certify engines. We've got a little video on compressor stall, real short one. We're going to talk about compressor stalls. Have you ever hear a compressor stall? Hear one? No? Kind of a little banging sound coming out of a turbine engine. Well, we'll talk about those today because it's something everybody talks about, so you should know what it is. So we'll just deal with compressors today. I think that'll be enough. And then next week we'll go into diffuser sections and combustion sections, and we'll just keep working our way until we get out to tailpipe. See, this is week 5. No test next week. We'll be probably a couple weeks away yet for any of you that have questions about that. So let me get the roll. So we have that's Boots, Severa, Farmer,
Here.
Here. Mascalco and we are going to be waiting for stuck in traffic.
Jefferson. Lane. Kinder. Manning? Manning? Any Mannings here? Morgan's here. Myrick? Wynn, I saw him. There he is. Pins on. Rodriguez. Seriosa. So this is here. Bora. Tyson. And Winks. There you go. Okay. One of those things, getting his feet underneath it. Let me ask you this. So we were working on the combustion section last week. How are y'all doing with that? You got it pretty well scoped out? Pretty well figured out how it works back there? Do you need another class period, another couple hours, or should we have a little test this week or next week? Check out. Anybody? Any thoughts?
Partway through this week.
Next week.
Okay, next week. Well, you're saying partway through this week. How many partway through this week? Maybe 3/4. And next week? Don't stall off the inevitable. How about the rest of you? You don't want to do it at all. I got it. So what Wheeler usually does is he has a sign-up sheet, and so when you're ready, you sign up. But nobody ever signs up. So I wonder why. So he gets kind of panicked around, 16 weeks in the semester, right? So about week 15, he starts getting panicked that not everybody's done all their checkouts. Well, who said? I wonder why. No, you don't have to commit yourself, but that's I used to wonder why too, but still doing carburetor checkouts week 15. This one should take me long to figure that out. Yep. You're probably, most of you are probably more ready than you think you are. But still got some touch-ups to do. We'll get it done. We'll do it next week if you like. We've still got some time. we did inlets last week. And this is going to, kind of at first be a little bit of a recap on what we talked about with respect to compressors, but we'll get up and get running here pretty quick. And in fact, we'll start talking about a little bit of different stuff too. So we've got 50 slides and 2.5 hours. That should be okay. Usually I figure, when I first started doing this, I figured a slide a minute. And it worked out pretty good, except everybody needed carpal tunnel surgery at the end of the semester, so I slowed down a little bit, a little bit easier. I do still recommend that you take notes because that kind of attaches it to your brain. I heard somebody say that the other day, and one of the students, he said, I remember it better if I do that. Also, I had somebody, we have people, you've seen them, they wander through here all the time, visitors. Some are students, prospective students, and some are administration people, and some are industry people. And this one person, actually, it was our outreach people, and they were dragging, they had about 3 or 4 prospective students in tow, a couple of older ones and a couple of young ones. And one of the things that they said was, this place really looks, it looks very professional. And they said that everybody had their head down, they're all working, and everybody had their safety glasses on, and they all looked very safe and professional. So just so you know, this is the first semester that we've actually required safety glasses when you're not grinding and cutting outside. But know that because you're all getting on board with this, it kind of helps the look of the place as well. Anybody have any questions about stuff going on at the school here at all? Next week I'll be around harvesting all of you that are going to graduate this semester, so I'll be picking up those people next week. And if you talk to anybody that maybe has that question, please let them know or pass the word around too. Let's do that. Go away, little thing.
Just push it aside and see what it does.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Usually it moves. Oh, there it goes. All right, so a couple different types or styles of compressors. So what are they? Centrifugals, one, and what's the other one? That's it, all right. And so the practical limit on these things is going to be just two stages. Now you could put make it a 1 stage, 2 of them operating in parallel with each other in tandem. You'll understand that, right? 2 of them operating in off the same shaft, in both creating pressure, but there's no bump in pressure between one centrifugal wheel and the other wheel. Or you could have them so that they operate in series. So you could have one increasing the pressure, pushing it into the next one, and then that one boosts the pressure even higher. But two wheels, 2 centrifugal, is going to be kind of the maximum or optimum operating style for centrifugal compressors. Remember I said that the front of the engine starts getting kind of too big and the engine starts getting kind of too long for 2 stages. And so they just don't build anything really anymore. There were some early ones that were 3 and 4 stage, but these engines were humongous, so they don't build them anymore. Anything you've got to push through the air has got to be kind of a small profile, where it's really got to be creating a lot of pressure to pay for itself. So, and they're heavy. If you ever pick up that wheel that I had in here a week or 2 ago, the heavy son of a gun. And if you have 2 of those, then now you've got 60 pounds on an engine, 60, 70 pounds on an engine. And you don't want to be shipping that kind of weight around for 2 stages. All right, so you can use them in combination with an axial flow compressor. You all know what yours does now, your little engine outside. So it is a combination axial and then a centrifugal flow compressor, right? Okay, so here's a centrifugal flow compressor. Picks up the air. This thing is being driven mechanically. So it picks up the air at this lip, and it grabs it and throws it down this chute outward. Centrifugal force is what creates the pressure or the velocity in this compressor. When you look at it here, there's some different styles or shapes on these chutes. So it can pick it up here, and it gives it kind of a little swirl as it comes down. And there's some things that happen there. I'll talk about that in just a second. On the lip, the rear lip of this thing here, where it goes into the diffuser. This one here, of course, is known as what kind of compressor? Axial. Axial flow. Okay, so a single stage of compression with a centrifugal flow is going to be 6 and 7 to 1, somewhere in that range there. So per stage of compression, when you weigh compression of axial versus centrifugal, you get more pressure rise out of the centrifugal compressor.
Sorry, that's for a centrifugal, the 6.1 to 7.1?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to talk about what inducers are?
What's that?
Colors?
Say again.
You're going to talk about what inducers are?
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are parts.
Different name.
There are parts to this compressor stage, and so the impeller is the part that turns. So centrifugal compressor refers to the housing that it's in also.
They make them out of titanium because they get so hot.
I'm sorry?
Is the reason why they're making them out of titanium is because we're heat?
Well, for strength, because these things are running so fast, they have to be pretty strong. And they're pretty big units. So when they start getting big, you want to make them light too. So it has to be strong and light as well. Ceramic, because it's easy to make. They just pour it into a mold. And they come back, they do a little bit of machine work on it.
The single stage, is there a centrifugal engine that's just a single stage? Is that enough compression to run an engine?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it is. But you have to run a lot of air through it, so they get to be pretty big monsters to create enough pressure.
Could you explain the 6 to 1 compression, like for every?
Sure, for every this much that goes into it, it
Yeah.
gets compressed 6 times.
Okay, thank you.
Now, impellers, also known as inducers, they can balance these by weight removal. You're going to see this when you get to your turbine section. So what they'll do is they'll take, actually there will be a ring that will be molded into or cut into the rotor. And they'll actually grind metal off of that ring to balance it. So these things have dense spots in them. They're made out of big chunks of steel and they're machined down. But you're going to end up with different densities in them. So you might end up with heavy spots and light spots that have to be balanced because these things turn pretty quick. And if you have it out of balance, you're going to end up with a vibration. You want to minimize the vibration as much as possible. So once you get into your turbines, probably next week, you're going to see that. I'm going to maybe point that out for you. All right, so the diffuser or the compressor manifold, this is all part of the centrifugal compressor. It's usually cast aluminum, might have some stainless steel parts in it for abrasion resistance. Remember, you're forcing air through this thing. When you force air through it, you also force dust and dirt and everything else through it, so that is an abrasive. And as that abrasive goes through an aluminum housing, that aluminum housing is going to wear. Okay, so the air is going to enter in the center at that lip. The centrifugal force is going to accelerate that air. Through that acceleration, it's going to move outward from the center, from the rotational axis of that impeller. So what we're doing is we're pumping the air at a high velocity using this mechanically driven impeller. And then air comes off the lip. It's ejected at the rim. That's called the exducer, part where the air comes off the wheel and it blows it into the diffuser. The diffuser is just a big ring. It's like a big hollow donut. And this air is being thrown into that hollow donut. And when it comes off of the wheel, it's running at a pretty high rate of speed, but all of a sudden it finds itself in an area, just a big opening, a big void that we're forcing this air into. So what happens to the pressure in there? What kind of a duct is that? What is it?
Diverging.
A diverging duct. And so the pressure does what?
Goes up.
Pressure jumps up. Now, some impellers are going to have what they call a reverse lip on them. And what that does, that just lets the air slide off of the end of the wheel a little bit easier. There's a shock wave that's created when the air starts moving too fast at the edge of the wheel. The wheel dumps the air out, and then the next blade comes by and slices through what was just thrown off the wheel. But when it does that, it creates a shearing action in the air. And there's a shock wave that slows down the air, but it also causes it to try to stay on the wheel. It doesn't want to go into that low pressure zone or into that diverging duct. So what they do is they have a little reversed lip, which just allows the air to slide off the outside diameter of the wheel a little bit easier. So instead of having veins that are straight down the side, they just curl back. I think I've got a picture here. Yeah. You see how that could work? So this is going to bite the air here. It's going to come down this trough, and it's going to come off the back. But this just has a reverse lip on it. It kind of curls backwards. So this wheel is turning this direction. It just allows the air to slide off a little bit easier off the back end of the wheel. Now some of these that you've seen just have a straight chute that comes straight down the side here. And that doesn't, it just pushes the air comes off the back, but then that next vein comes by and whacks that air and causes a pressure wave to occur there. And it tries to, if this thing is turning so fast, what happens is it tries to hold it in that chute, doesn't allow it to slide out of there real easy. So axial flow. Anybody have a question about centrifugal flow compressors? So centrifugal flow compressors do get flooded. They go in there and just grind a little metal off, but if you start grinding too much metal off, you'll lose the clearance between the housing and the wheel, and then you'll lose the efficiency on the compressor. Now these things are pretty strong because they're built so heavy. There isn't much usually happens to them, so you don't have to worry about that so much. But know that they can be damaged by debris going through the engine. Okay, so axial flow compressors. From one stage to the next, there's going to be a continual rise in air pressure. There's going to be a continual, with that rise in pressure comes a rise in temperature, right? You know, when the pressure goes up, the temperature goes up. That's what we're looking for. But throughout the compressor, if you look at that little graph that I gave you early on, you're going to see that there's a kind of a minimal rise in air velocity from stage 1 to stage 13, 14, 15, however many stages there are. So this thing, we're looking for a rise in pressure out of this compressor, not a rise in velocity. Okay, so here's a beautiful compressor. Somebody spent a lot of time polishing these blades. Is that the question? So you can see at each stage the blades get shorter and they get closer together. This is the rotor that you're looking at here. If you look up above, those are the stators up here. So this uses a clamshell type stator. All of these vanes up here are attached to an outer case. And there are two halves. Just think that one half is already on the engine here. The other half just fits over just like a clamshell, kind of like the engine you folks have outside there.
Sorry, kind of off topic, but doing a compressor wash, like flushing Turco or whatever, is that pretty standard?
Yeah, pretty common. Yeah, it kind of depends. So Turco's a soap. Turco's a company, but they make soaps.
Yeah.
And so using a soap or just using water or using soap and water it's a very common thing. Yeah, incredibly common. So you know when you go get your car washed, right? And 2 days later it's got a film all over it, just dirt, stuff in the air from being in the city. Well, because these things consume so much air, it multiplies that effect. So you drive down the freeway, and sometimes if you look at the leading edge of everything on your car, you can run your hand up your radio antenna, for instance, and it comes back with a brown streak on it, right? Well, the same thing happens on a turbine engine because of the immense amount of air that they digest. So actually that stuff builds up faster and faster inside of an engine. And so anything that you do to change the airfoil shape, what does that do to the performance of the engine?
Degrades it.
It's going to be degrading, yeah. So washing an engine is a huge deal, especially in dirty climates. The good example is agricultural aircraft that use turbine engines, or military aircraft that are out over salt water a lot. Anything in a marine environment, places where the stuff can build up rapidly. All right, so we're going to have this constant buildup be accomplished by using multiple rotors with multiple compressor blades on each rotor. We're going to stack those. We're going to have multiple stators, one stator between each rotor. And so if you have a rotor and then a stator, that's one stage. You should write that down if you haven't already. One rotor and one stator is a stage. I think it's even an FAA test question. What comprises the stage in the turbine engine.
One more time.
What's that?
Can you say it one more time?
Sure.
Bottom thing on the slide.
Bottom line here for you. You're still Ryan down in front. That'll take care of it. You'll be able to see what's going on. All right. One rotor and one stator is going to comprise a single stage. All right, so what's going to happen here? You should get this one because this is pretty darn important. This is how the whole thing works. Is that you're going to have a moving blade, the rotor blade, compressor blade, has a number of different names for it. So it's going to act like a wing. Now the air isn't moving so much over the wing because the wing is moving through the air. And when it does, it's going to raise the velocity. So you move a wing through the air. What happens to the airflow in flight on a wing, an aircraft wing?
It goes faster.
The air velocity is going to increase, and the pressure on the one side of it's going to do what?
Decrease.
Decrease. So anytime you increase the velocity, you're going to decrease the pressure. Okay, so just think of this as a whole bunch of Cessna 150 wings tied to a wheel. Now, then you're going to have a stator, and that air now, because it's starting to move fast across those compressor blades, now it's starting to move through the engine. When it goes between the stator blades, stator vanes, it creates they're built so that the stator vanes act as a diverging duct. So when that high velocity air goes between the stator blades, goes through a diverging duct, what happens to the pressure? Goes up, and the temperature goes up, and the velocity goes down. Exactly right. Okay. So we're going to kill off a lot of that velocity just by moving it through the stator section. So the next compressor stage is going to raise the velocity again. It's going to raise the velocity before it impacts the stators. When it hits the stators, the pressure is going to go up. Pressure goes up, and the temperature goes up, and we're going to kill the velocity back off of it again. So it kind of is a jerky little program there, one stage after another for however many stages you have. And when this happens, stage after stage after stage, it's known as a cascade effect. Oh, you've seen a avalanche before, haven't you? Seen pictures of an avalanche? I hope you've never been in one. Where it starts off with maybe a little bit of snow, starting to slide down a hill, then it breaks something else loose, and then it breaks something else loose, and then pretty soon the whole side of the mountain's falling down. So that's kind of what happens here, is that one air molecule moves another one, moves another one, moves another one, and pretty soon you've got a bunch of molecules all moving through the engine. Cascade effect. Now this doesn't work so good with a centrifugal compressor because we only have a couple stages. But where it really works is with an axial compressor, stage after stage after stage. And that's why these axial compressors on bigger engines, you're looking at about 13, 14, 15 stages of compression. On smaller engines, you can get away with 5 or 6, especially if you have a centrifugal compressor to absorb everything the axial compressor has done and then bump it up again. Okay, compressor pressure ratio. Now this is just talking about the compressor. It's not talking about the engine pressure ratio. Just the compressor. And this is the pressure entering the inlet of the engine. entering the inlet of the engine. And this is with respect to the air pressure coming out the back of the compressor, the last stage of compression. So that'll be the last piece in the compressor is going to be a stator. So first you have the rotor, then you have a stator. Rotor, stator, rotor, stator, rotor, stator. However many stages you have, but it will end up with a rotor and then a stator. The last piece coming off that compressor will be a stator. Now this can vary dramatically on the engines, on different engines. So some engines, well, engines all have what they call margin. And the margin is the amount of air that the compressor makes relative to what the engine needs to keep running and create thrust. So the extra margin is used for things like bleed air. So we use bleed air for anti-icing. We use bleed air for environmental systems on the aircraft, pneumatic systems and such. We use the compressor to drive the main accessory gearbox. That's pumps and generators and all that sort of thing. So it has to be able to create enough energy to run all this other stuff and create thrust for the engine too. So that extra energy that it creates is called margin. Okay, so at each successive stage, in turn, the blades and vanes are placed closer and closer together. As we squeeze the air down, we don't need so much space between the blades and vanes. We're compressing that air. So it doesn't have to move 2 inches and then move another 2 inches and then move another 2 inches. You start with 2 inches, but as you compress the air, that volume of air gets smaller and smaller and smaller as it goes further and further back through the engine. Now it was early on, they built compressor blades out of aluminum. And they worked okay, but they started vibrating and shaking, and then they digest 1 or 2, and next thing you know, you didn't have a compressor anymore. So now, more modern engines with better metallurgy now use fewer stages. They use longer blades. You still get shorter and shorter and closer together as you go further back, but you can do it with larger blades. They're stronger, and so you end up with fewer stages of compression. And when you end up with fewer stages of compression, what happens to the size of the engine? It starts to shrink a little bit, right? It starts to shrink. Now the weight of the engine may not change a whole lot, but what it's going to do is going to make a more compact engine. So when you're driving that engine through the air, now you don't have such a big engine to drive through the air. Also, might even weigh a little bit less. So now you're shipping less equipment around, and you do it with a little bit better fuel efficiency. So, just to recap here. So this is the compressor section here. You see the first stage up here. A lot of times they call this the booster, the first stage. And the reason they do that is because it's the one that really gets the air moving into the compressor. Really gives it a leg up and gets it going. If you have a fan, an engine with a big fan on it up here, the fan is primarily used to drive the aircraft through the air. It's a multi-bladed propeller. But the booster is the one that's going to actually start driving the air into the compressor and get it moving. The other thing that happens is when you have a big fan, it tends to exclude some air from the core of the engine just a little bit. It will drive air in, but it won't drive it in as well as if it was just exposed to the front of the aircraft, just the boosters. So these are the boosters that kind of start to accelerate. So the first stage may well be known as a booster. But here, what I want you to really see is the size of these, and how the length gets shorter. You get to have more blades. You have the shorter blades, and they start getting packed closer together.
There's more angle of attack as well.
A little more angle of attack further back you go too. Yeah.
I'm just curious with the blades, when you go back further, is it like a, from an engineering point of view, like, does it get like, for example, like 2/3 smaller every time, or you know what I mean?
I'm sure there's some proportion and some ratio to it, and every engine, you'll look at this one here, and it'll look different than some other engine, stage for stage. But that also is a function of the diameter and the height of the blades. Yeah, that's not anything that we end up getting mixed up with. It's something that really engineering people, a lot of it's trial and error, but a lot of it over the years, they've kind of figured out what the proportions are and what works and what doesn't work. Because you're still dealing with air, you know, here we are 50, 60 years on making turbine engines, but we're still dealing with air. We still have the same fluid to work with. Okay, so axial flows, they have some problems. There's good and bad. So you kill one blade, you kill them all. Okay. So even a little piece of something, a little clipping off the cotter pin or a little piece of safety wire going through the engine is going to degrade it noticeably. Also, they move so much air, not only they get dirty, but also they get abraded, and so so the cord begins to wear on them. And as the cord begins to wear, you don't have as much efficiency on the blade. The air doesn't accelerate across the surface of the blade as much because it isn't as long, and so you end up losing a little bit of efficiency. So if an engine is operated in a dirty environment, where it absorbs and sucks up a lot of dirt, it's going to act like sandpaper in there and degrade the blades. And it can significantly degrade the performance of the engine.
You know how often is required to be inspected?
What's that?
You know how often is required to be inspected?
Usually what they do is they time them, so at a certain time limit and under certain conditions, because you know aircraft get used in so many darn different places. But generally speaking, you can't really. Let me put it this way: you can, but most borescopes aren't set up to check blade cores. They're just really set up to pick up debris and also to look for damage. Yeah. So an aircraft that operates in a lot of water will eventually degrade the blades too, because the water acts like an abrasive because of the speed the blades are moving. So most of the time, insofar as blade degradation goes from normal wear and tear, it's an hour. Yeah.
So water methanol injection for takeoff, you know, when that's required, that does noticeably affect blade life?
Well, they inject the water, but they don't inject it in front of the compressor. They put it in the back.
Okay, in the turbine area?
Not in the turbine, right before it goes to the combustion section.
Okay.
So the blades don't actually run in any kind of liquid.
Okay, that makes more sense.
So compressor stalls, here's something that you should know about. So we know that throughout the compressor, the pressure builds, but it's not a linear build. It's like I was telling you about the cascade effect. It kind of starts out, and then it starts building very, very quickly the further back you go through the compressor. So it's not linear. But you still have to have a nice, smooth pressure build throughout the compressor. So this is known as surging. This is the compressor pushing the air the wrong way because of uneven compressor pressure ratios. So with an ideal compressor pressure ratio, it's a nice smooth build of pressure all the way through the compressor. from stage to stage, just builds a nice smooth pressure curve.
So if the first stage was 6-1, say the second stage is 6-1, and then whatever. So if you have 6 stages, you end up with 36-1 at the end. You're saying?
Yeah, roughly.
I mean,
Yeah, because you're gonna just give you some losses in there, but yeah, you can probably figure that.
Okay.
Now, it won't be that high with an axial compressor, but yeah, if you're using those numbers, yeah, should rise. It's not gonna be linear because it's gonna kind of bend a little bit, but the further back it goes, the higher the pressure gets.
Okay.
But it should be a nice smooth curve. So there's some different types of stalls. There's choking stalls. Choking stalls occur at low speeds, lower engine RPM. So this is going to cause a lower compression at the rear of the compressor. What that does is that lowers the overall volume of air that goes through the engine. Well, you can imagine, so the combustion section, most of you are ready for a checkout on that now. If you add the fuel and the engine isn't moving enough volume of air through it, and the fuel lights in the combustor, where's it going to try to go?
Back into the engine.
Where?
Back to the engine.
Back out.
Back out the front. Well, some of it will go out the back too. It's just looking for a way out. So we use the compressor to create a pressure wall to keep the combustion in the combustion section. It's just air. It's the only thing that holds that fire in the combustion section. So if the speed of the engine is too slow, when we light the combustor, it's going to run right out the front and the back and anywhere it can. It's called a choking stall. Now, because it's doing that, is the engine going to accelerate? No. No, because you're not going to generate enough heat and drive it over the turbine, which is going to turn the compressor. So it's going to kind of find a stagnant, steady state. So if this low flow persists, it's just going to continue to cause the airflow at the front to become less and less and less. The engine won't accelerate, and that fire is going to come out the front of the engine.
So what's a good RPM to, or is that all
It's
based
going
on
to
the
be
engine?
typically on a start. There's a couple other things that can enter into this. We'll talk about those in a second. Now, there's some other things that can help cause this, and that is low compression because you have air density changes from temperature or altitude at the front of the compressor. So you descend into dry air. It can also cause this problem on an engine that's running. And you'd be surprised just descending through a layer of moist air into a layer of dry air, or vice versa, can cause engine stall problems while the engine is at idle. It'll change the density of the air inside the engine so rapidly, the engine won't be able to accommodate it. Now, something in that case can be done, you can actually accelerate the engine slightly because you already have compressibility of the air in front of the engine because of the aircraft speed. And when you're sitting on the ground, you don't have that option. Okay, so there's something else. Too much pressure in the rear of the compressor is going to impede flow through the compressor. So all of a sudden you have too much pressure at the back of the compressor. What would be the thing, maybe something that would cause the airflow to become temporarily obstructed in the front of the compressor? So if you have the compressor, you start at the front and all of a sudden you impede the airflow into the compressor, and then maybe that something disappears and the airflow is then unrestricted and the compressor picks it up again. What's going to happen is that air flows through the compressor. That's all happens pretty quick.
Pulse.
What's that?
Pulse.
It's going to be like a pulse going through the engine. Exactly right. So what would cause that? A bird. Bird strike. Yeah, bird strike. So it'll grind a bird up, but a bird will momentarily disrupt the airflow through the compressor. Okay, so if you have low flow at the front of the compressor, too high a air pressure in the back of the compressor, it creates a unstable flow of pressure throughout the compressor. And as that bubble goes through, you're going to have a low pressure zone reach the combustion chamber momentarily. And when it hits the combustion chamber momentarily, where's that fire going to try to go?
Back out the front.
Back out the front, and then it'll come back in again because that pressure is going to build in that compressor and it's going to push it right back in there. But what happens to the blades and vanes when that stall occurs? So you have all that pressure coming back out of the combustor, going forward through the compressor, and then it changes direction and goes the other way. What happens to all those blades and vanes?
Like the drop in RPM.
It's like somebody just whips them, right? Somebody just whips them, and they can break when that occurs, right? Especially if it happens a lot. So that creates kind of a problem for the engine. If something breaks in there, not so good, right? So there's another cause for that, and it's disrupted airflow, inlet damage, the lip angle on the inlet, FOD, wind up the tailpipe, WUTP. Any of you ever, helicopter guys? How many helicopter guys are anybody? Okay, so so did you ever try to start or find the air crew try to start the engine and it didn't really want to start when the wind was blowing? Or the wind blow, you ever notice it? Okay, so what happens, especially on smaller engines, and especially if the tailpipe is exposed to the outside world. A lot of helicopter engines are inside the airframe, so they don't have this problem. But you can imagine, you've got a turbine engine, and the wind is blowing up the tailpipe. Now, if you look from the tailpipe to the front of the engine, you can see light, usually. There's on a fan engine, or even on a small axial flow engine. And if that air is moving the wrong direction for the engine, and you're just cranking the engine, are you going to be able to generate enough air to defeat the airflow that's blowing up the tailpipe?
Probably not.
Probably not at a start, because these engines, the little engines especially, don't create enough pressure that they can overcome that airflow. Maybe 10, 15 knots of the tailpipe will prevent the engine from starting. If you do get it started, it may hot start. And the reason for that is because it doesn't have enough air going through it when you add the fuel. Maybe you have enough rotor speed, but you don't have enough air going through the engine to mix with the fuel that you're about to add to it. So you add too much fuel and not enough air, what happens to the mixture?
Goes way rich.
It goes rich, then what happens to the temperature?
Goes down.
Temperature goes fire, think fire. Temperature's gonna go up. Now, there's a solution to it, real easy, double simple. Think about it, what would you do? Turn the helicopter around the other way, right? Or turn the aircraft around the other way. Now, there's parts of this world where they fly turbofan engines, and they have to do that too, because the wind blows so damn hard all the time, right? You start talking 30, 40 knots of wind, you have to turn the airplane around and start it leading into the wind. We'll talk about trimming engines also, and when you trim an engine, it has to be done only one way, and that is you turn the aircraft into the wind. Trimming an engine means you set it up for the airframe, everything balances, the throttles all work in synchronized fashion with the others on the aircraft. Means the fuel flows are all the same, there's some adjustments you have to make here and there. But basically, when you do this, it all has to be started from one basic position, and that is facing into the wind. Everything is predicated on that. So the FAA test question is, while trimming an engine, what is one thing that you absolutely must do on every engine trim?
Face it into the wind.
Face it into the wind, all right? Can't do it during icing conditions or inclement weather, then you have to turn it into the wind. So there you go. All right. Wind up the tailpipe. Worn blades and vanes. Try to start an engine with worn blades and vanes. How much compression are you going to get with that engine?
Not enough.
It's not going to generate a lot. Right? So there's another reason for it. So there's another kind of stall called an acceleration stall. When the engines are tested, they come out of overhaul, they do what they call snap accels. Snap accels. And those snap accels are meant to check and see how fast the engine will accelerate with the throttle lever angle, the TLA at 0, and pushed all the way forward. How fast will the engine accelerate? Now, there's two things they're looking for here, is that time to power, and the other one is to make sure the engine doesn't stall during that climb to 100% power. Two things they're looking for. Now, if you increase the airflow too quickly throughout the engine, it degrades the angle of attack. It increases the angle of attack, has that effect. And so you start screwing with the pressure zones around the blades. So aircraft wing, flying along, everything's nice. Everybody's fat, dumb, and happy. Everybody's quiet, got their earbuds in. And so you increase the angle of attack, you're going to increase the climb. And oh my gosh, here comes a hill. We got to get over that hill. So you pull back, pull back, pull back. What happens to the wing, the airflow over the wing, as you get to a point where the wing is no longer creating lift? What is happening to that wing? Why does it lose lift?
Turbulence on top.
Turbulence, okay?
Airflow separates from the top of the
Airflow
wing.
separates from the
and you
wing,
stall.
right? And then what also happens to that wing?
It ceases to generate lift.
Ceases to generate lift, all of that. But what also happens to that wing? That's a drag on the wing. Does it go up or go down?
It increases.
It increases, right? So the drag increases, and that also happens with these airfoils here. So after a point, well, these aren't adjustable. Increasing that air flow too quickly across those blades is going to have the same effect. It's going to increase the turbulence. It's going to increase the drag across the blade. And what happens to the velocity across the blade when that happens? It goes velocity, right? It goes right in the can. So the turbulence is going to lower the compression and the airflow. And anything you do that lower that pressure is got that bubble of low pressure air going through there, you've got high pressure in the combustor, and all of a sudden, you've got this low pressure bubble floating through this thing. You're gonna hear, at the very minimum, you're gonna hear a bump or a thump coming out of the engine, because that's the compression, the combustion gas trying to come forward. And you might even see fire come out the front of the engine.
I would imagine most passengers don't like seeing that.
Passengers, they hate to see that. Yeah, they hate to see that. Yes, it makes them all sweaty, nervous. They stain the seats. I think I got a little picture of this. The engine's run along nice and happy, and all of a sudden, it has too much air. You just killed the compression at the front of the engine. It'll eventually catch up, it doesn't blow the engine up. All right, I'm gonna show you this. You're gonna see this. Now, this is on a C-17 in Germany. It was at an air show. C-17, y'all know, well, you'll know what it is in a second, but you don't know. So it's a big cargo plane. And one of the features of the C-17 is it's built to land on unimproved runways, dirt strips that will support the weight. So they can land these things just about any god-awful place, and then they back them into parking. So they'll use the reversers, back the whole airplane up. Yeah. So let me show you this, and then I'll explain it also. This runs on a loop. So watch for the fire coming out the thrust reverser. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
That little flash there? Okay, that was a compressor stall. Well, how they back this up is they use the thrust reversers. And so, let me run that again. You'll also notice the vortexes at the inlets. So those things are they're a long way off the ground. But you can see they're sucking a lot of air into the engine. That's causing a pressure drop. When it causes that pressure drop, the moisture comes out of the air. Do that again. Now, they use the thrust reversers, and the thrust reversers, real quick, are blowing the air this way across the front of the inlet. So that all of a sudden is going to drop the air pressure at the inlet. You see that? So what we've done is we've knocked that air pressure down at the inlet. And all of a sudden that engine that's running, oh, I didn't want that.
Maybe this is interesting.
We're going to take a break here.
It's an old Boeing video.
How do I get back?
I think just press the back button, yeah.
That one?
I think it's refreshed.
Yeah, there we go. As soon as you lower the pressure in the front of that thing, now you have the compressor causing you problems, right? You have that engine running at pretty high speed. The compressors on these things run, when the thrust reverser is deployed, it only runs at about 70% of the speed of the engine, because they don't want too much power being generated with the air going through it the wrong way. And the reason you didn't see the fire come out the front of the engine is because the thrust reverser blocks that air that comes into the front of the engine. So the fire was going up, hit the thrust reverser, and then coming out the back of the thrust reverser. And that's why you didn't see it coming out the front. Yeah, we don't want this. It was like VHS or something.
So what was those little,
Show you one more time.
so what was the little white thing that come
Little
out?
vortex?
Yeah, vortex.
Yeah, that little vortex is a low pressure zone
Yeah.
because the air is being drawn up
Yeah.
into the engine. And it's a pretty warm, humid day. And so what happens is the moisture, as you lower the pressure, what happens to the moisture in the air? Condenses out, is what it does. It's like your Slurpee cup. Lower the temperature, what happens to the moisture? Condensation, right? Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so let's take a little break. and we'll move on from here. I got some more pictures to show you. All right, so any questions on that so far? Okay, so just know that this stuff can be pretty detrimental to an engine. Quite a number of years ago, I think I told you this once when we were talking about inlets. They were doing some flight testing up at McDonnell Douglas in LA. And they changed the configuration of the inlet because it was kind of too close to the ground for some operators. And so what they do is they take off, nice easy climb, and all of a sudden they pull the nose up on it. Well, when they did, because airplanes don't go this way through the sky, although they may look like it, they kind of go this way through the sky. And when it did, the air spilled over the inlet lip. And when it did, it created a turbulence in the inlet. And when it did, it lowered the air pressure in the front of the engine. And when it lowered the air pressure in the front of the engine, what happened to the compressor air?
Lost it.
Yeah, too much air, high pressure air in the back of the compressor, which is absorbed by the combustion chamber. All of a sudden, it was low pressure in there. Where did the combustion gas go? Okay, so this thing pounded. It sounded. I was in my hotel room. The windows started shaking. Kaboom, 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 about 5 times. It shook the windows. It was so loud. Of course, we were right on the airport. People were calling the cops, figuring it was 9/11 all over again. And so something that's kind of out of the ordinary. So they went back and they redesigned the inlet. It was fine. But know that something like that pull the airplane up too quick. Of course, there was nobody on the airplane either, and the airplane was going like hell. But just that air spilling over the inlet lip caused that compressor stall to occur. Now this will happen on aircraft that are used for cargo. A lot of times they'll fly them around empty. And the crew will complain of compressor stall, or maybe all 4 engines, all 3 engines will do that. And the reason for that is because they get a little bit too spiffy and pull it up a little too quick. The airplane accelerates rapidly. It's kind of like flying a sports car all of a sudden instead of a heavy transport. When they do that, that's when that will occur on those inlets. All right, let's take a break. Come back at about 10 till. We'll go some more.